If you have questions or suggestions for future podcasts, please submit them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Giving to the poor. Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Should we give to the poor or help the poor? Now, that interesting question was posed by one of you who listens to the Christian Economist podcast. When helping hurts. The first answer comes from the book When Helping Hurts by Corbett and Fickert. I was pleased to meet Brian Fickert at a meeting of the Christian Economic Forum this summer, partly to thank him for his very good book, but also to discover there is a Christian economist taller than me. I'm about 6'4", and Brian goes about 6'7". Oh, now the other source that I mentioned is a very good series of videos hosted by Michael Matheson Miller at the Acton Institute, and it's called Poverty Cure. Okay. I could state numerous scriptures that tell us we are supposed to care for the poor, but here's just a couple. Proverbs 29:7 says, "The righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern." And then we turn to Matthew 25, where in verse 35 it says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in." There's pretty good agreement that Christians are supposed to care for the poor. The question is, how? God's sovereignty and man's responsibility. Now, when I posed this question in my Dallas Baptist University class last week, I asked students for a better theological term to describe what I was talking about. Sorry, I didn't get very good answers, so I'll stay with this title for now. It was given to Ginger and I in a Sunday school class about 10 years ago. God is sovereign and he can do what he wants. If he wants to help the poor, he can do it on his own via his miraculous power. But for some reason, he chooses to do his work through humans, which means it is man's responsibility. So he puts poor people in front of us and expects us to care for them. When do we turn away from the poor and say, "Oh, God will take care of them because of God's sovereignty"? And when do we jump in and help because it's man's responsibility? Too much freedom. Okay, this one is difficult for me because when Sergei Seidamatov and I wrote the book Biblical Economic Policy, the first of the 10 commandments of economics we found was called People Should Be Free. And as I've studied and learned more in the 2 years since we wrote the book, I've become even more convinced that the intersection of Christianity and economics is freedom. But you can't find any society where people are perfectly free. I'm going to have more to say about that in a future podcast where I'll attempt to explain the term expressive individualism from the best book I've read this year, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Carl Trueman. But for now, let's accept that you can't have a perfectly free society. And that's where a recent article in the Wall Street Journal comes in, titled "Housing First Foments Homelessness in California." The article is by Joe Lonsdale and Judge Glock, and it explains how the state's policies have encouraged homelessness. More than 150,000 Californians are homeless on any given night. Most of them live outside in streets and parks. More than half the country's unsheltered homeless are in the Golden State. An academic study by criminologist Richard Burke and John McDonald at the University of Pennsylvania showed that violence and death among the homeless went down when Los Angeles enforced anti-camping laws. Then it went back up when the laws were not enforced. The homeless have been granted the freedom to harm themselves and others. That's too much freedom. Here's the problem. In California, they're given government-subsidized housing with no pre-qualifications like sobriety, drug treatment, or psychiatric care. That means no matter how much you increase the supply, it will always be outstripped by demand. The article explains, research shows that policies don't work. A 2017 Journal of Housing Economics study found that cities must build about 10 new permanent subsidized homes to get even one person off the street. Now that's because many such homes end up being occupied by people who would have found a place to live anyway. Free homes are attractive, even to those who could conceivably afford to pay. California can't build 1 million free homes for the homeless, especially when recent affordable housing in the state costs upwards of $700,000 a unit to build, ending the quote from the article. Okay, let's do the math. That means it would cost $7 million to get one person off the street. 150,000 times 7 million is just over $1 trillion, just to solve the current problem. For comparison, the GDP of the entire state of California is just over $3 trillion, while the annual state budget is just over $300 billion. Now, if my math is correct, and I think it is, it would take over 3 years of the entire California state budget just to solve the current problem. And that's not even considering the moral hazard that would increase the demand for this free housing. The government stole our command. I find myself quoting my fellow Christian economist Art Lindsley in this topic quite often. In his book titled Free Indeed, he writes, "The government should punish evil but not do good. The church should do good but not punish evil." The church could solve the problem in a much more efficient manner than the government. But why don't they? Well, one answer is church attendance is declining. Second, the government stole our command. I have time for only one example today. A very small harbor church in Ventura, California was doing great work helping the homeless until the police closed them down. A staff member, who was once homeless himself, says he was disappointed because the church was helping, both spiritually and physically. Sounds like diversity and inclusion to me. They had a daytime church called Operation Grace, which the church folks really enjoyed. Pastor Sam Gallucci explains, "We shifted from doing church only on Sunday to doing church Monday to Saturday. Every week, up to 200 homeless people participated in the church fellowship, prayer, worship, music, and pastoral counseling. They listened to sermons, they took communion, and they did Bible studies. As far as I can tell, the police closed down the mission at the harbor, telling them they could only practice their religion on Sunday." I know, that's not a very clear answer, is it? But the point is this: when the church tries to help, they are often prevented from doing so by the powerful authorities. For more evidence that the law doesn't work, I'll note that San Francisco voters approved a camping ban in 2016, but the city leaders are not enforcing it. So much for those who say we need another law, because it was a judicial change that caused the problem. Let me cite a 1975 Supreme Court decision. It ruled that a state cannot, quote, confine a non-dangerous individual who is capable of surviving safely in freedom by themselves, end quote. You've noticed a lot of wiggle words in that sentence that are not well defined. So homeless people who have mental health and addiction problems cannot be forced into care that would improve their lives. And now a word from our foreign correspondent. Oh, I guess that's me. I've been to 58 countries. And what I notice in communist countries is there are no homeless. The government has almost totally stolen the commandment from the church. In those countries, there's almost no freedom. When a homeless person is found by the authorities in an authoritarian country that we're talking about, they're forced into a care facility of some kind. Now, recent U.S. presidential administrations have given too much admiration to societies that have a very unchristian view of freedom. As in, they have no freedom. Now, okay, there's a balance between allowing people to have freedom, but ending that freedom when it poses danger to the homeless and to those they encounter. You get the behavior you tolerate. Ginger and I often use that phrase, and we found it from a book called Extreme Ownership by former Navy SEALs Jocko Willink and Leif Babbitt. But in economics, we say it slightly differently. We say, you get what you reward. That's why one of the seminal books in economics is titled Human Action, and it's written by Ludwig von Mises. Many homeless people are rewarded by governmental programs at the city, state, and federal level. Thus, they're encouraged to live on the street. A high percentage of people are homeless by choice. There's a cottage industry in helping the poor, among both for-profits and not-for-profits. This is what the video series Poverty Cure rails against. And as the supply of drugs increases because of a porous southern border in the United States, the price of hallucinogenics gets cheaper. So think about it. Governments at various levels reward people for living on the street. Illegal drug prices are lowered, and we call it a problem? Yeah, I used to do some work as a consultant. One of our phrases was, your organization is perfectly designed to produce the outcome you're experiencing. See, that's the power of economics. We know that people respond to incentives. As a society, we've put them in the wrong place. Tom Giovannetti at the Institute for Policy Innovation recently hosted former U.S. Ambassador John Bolton in the Dallas area for a speech. Ambassador Bolton clearly stated, all government agencies have wasteful spending. Oh, of course they do. They're populated by people who serve their own self-interest by spending other people's money. Churches, in comparison, are populated by people who have committed to serve the interest of others with their own money. The church is called to serve the poor. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time. For more information, please visit us online at davearnott.com. If you have questions or suggestions for future podcasts, please submit them online or in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.